The clammy air of Innsmouth clung to me like a shroud woven from brine and decay. Every morning I woke to it, a persistent, fishy tang that permeated the threadbare curtains, the cheap linoleum, and the very marrow of my bones. It was the scent of the town, an inescapable signature, and today it felt heavier, colder, laced with an unfamiliar metallic tang that set my teeth on edge. My name is Arthur Pendleton, though everyone just called me Art. I was 23. And my life was a monotonous loop of weighing flour, stacking canned goods, and enduring the unsettling stares of the locals at the First National grocery chain store. I'd taken the job in Innsmouth 2 years ago, fresh out of high school in Arkham, desperate for work and foolishly believing a few miles would separate me from the whispers of my family's dwindling fortunes. I'd quickly learned that some distances were measured not in miles, but in horrors. This morning was different. The perpetual mist that veiled Innsmouth in a shroud of perpetual twilight felt denser, pressing against the window panes of my cramped room above the decrepit bakery. There was no sound from the streets below. No grating creak of a departing fishing trawler. No distant, muffled thud of a delivery truck. Just a profound, unnatural silence that hummed with unseen tension. Something had happened last night. At first light, old Zadok, the town's only source of gossip, and usually too drunk to be coherent, had stumbled into the grocery store, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his voice a hoarse whisper. He got out, Art, the outsider, from Gilman House. The marshes, they lost him. Gilman House. The notorious, abandoned hotel at the edge of town, long whispered to be a place where the worst of Innsmouth's secrets festered. It was a place sane folk avoided. But the federal pair, they'd been here for days, a quiet, unsettling presence, poking around, asking questions. No one knew why. But the furtive townsfolk had been even more withdrawn, their already disturbing look seeming to sharpen, their eyes narrowing into reptilian slits when the federal agents were near. An outsider, possibly one of the feds, had apparently been cornered there, and now he was gone. It had been 2 days since now, and after a particularly bad dream, I awoke in a panic, a cold knot tight in my gut. An escaped outsider meant only one thing. The town's silent, watchful denizens would remain on high alert, and for the likes of me, an outsider myself, though a long-suffering one, that meant danger. Real, visceral danger. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the buttons of my work shirt. The thought of going to the store, of facing the silent, staring masses, made bile rise in my throat. But what choice did I have? I needed to think, to plan, and I needed to get out. The street below was eerily deserted as I stepped out, the usual stench of fish and salt strangely amplified, as if the very air was a concentrated essence of the ocean's depths. The crumbling facades of the buildings loomed, their windows like vacant, accusing eyes. Most of them were boarded up, leaning precariously. Innsmouth was a monument to decay, a town slowly dissolving back into the sea from which it seemed to have spawned. As I walked, I saw them. Not overtly, not in the numbers I usually did, but in the shadows, at the periphery of my vision. Figures hunched in doorways, their forms indistinct in the mist. I caught glimpses of movement behind grimy windows, the sudden, unsettling flicker of an eye. The Innsmouth look was always disturbing. The recessed flat noses, the sickly gray-green skin, the bulging, unblinking eyes that seemed to swim with an alien light. But today, it was more pronounced, more wet. Their movements, usually a shambling gait, seemed to possess an unnatural fluidity, a subtle undulation that was profoundly unsettling. I reached the First National Grocery, a squat brick building that somehow looked even more forlorn than usual. The sign hung askew, creaking faintly in the non-existent breeze. The front door was ajar. Odd. Mr. Wells, the proprietor, was notoriously meticulous about locking up. I pushed the door open, the bell above jangling with a sound that felt deafening in the silence. The interior of the store was dimly lit, the shelves of canned goods and dry provisions casting long, distorted shadows. The familiar smell of dust and stale biscuits was overlaid by that same overwhelming, fishy tang, now mingled with something else, something acrid and metallic, like stagnant blood. "Mr. Wells?" I called out, my voice thin, reedy. No answer. Only the drip, drip, drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the back. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was wrong. all wrong. Mr. Wells was always here, before me. He was one of them, of course. One of the more advanced cases of the Innsmouth look. His skin was perpetually damp, his voice a low croak, and his eyes bulged alarmingly. But he was predictable. I crept further into the store, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. The empty aisles stretched before me, a labyrinth of potential horrors. Then I saw it, a dark smear on the wooden floor near the back office, glistening wetly in the dim light. It was a trail, leading towards the office door, which was also ajar. "Mr. Wells?" I called again, my voice barely a whisper this time. A wet, scraping sound from inside the office, like something being dragged, and then a low, gurgling sigh. My breath hitched. My mind, usually so quick to analyze, to plan, was seized by a primal terror. I knew, with an awful certainty, that Mr. Wells was no longer in any state to answer. The escaped outsider, he'd clearly caused a stir, shaking something loose in this town that had been festering beneath the surface. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the office door. I needed to get out, now. The store was a trap. This entire town was a trap. My first thought was the abandoned train line. Innsmouth was once serviced by a single, sputtering train line that connected it to Rowley. There, of course, would be no train to catch, but the line was a definite way out of town, and one that did not warrant overdue attention by any of the locals. It was my best hope of a quick, clean escape. I burst out of the store, not bothering to close the door, and sprinted down the deserted street. The air was colder now, the mist thickening. I could feel eyes on me, though I saw no one distinctly. Every shadow seemed to coalesce. Every distant gurgle of the ocean sounded like a hungry growl. The train station was a small, dilapidated brick structure of reasonable architectural quality at the edge of town. When I arrived, gasping for breath, I saw it was empty. Thank the heavens. My eyes scanned the horizon. The tracks stretched distant, disappearing into the mist. I could walk. It would take hours, maybe a day, but it was better than staying. As I turned to follow the tracks, a figure emerged from the thick fog near. It was tall, gaunt, dressed in a fisherman's slicker, but the way it moved, it wasn't human. The slicker seemed to cling to a form that was too angular, too fluid. Its head was low, but I could feel its gaze upon me. Its skin, where visible, was that disturbing gray-green, slick with moisture. It took a step towards me, then another, a slow, deliberate advance, not running, but moving with an unnerving, predatory certainty. I could hear a faint, wet clicking sound as it moved. My blood ran cold. I turned and ran, back towards the town square, hoping to hitch a ride on the town bus. I would just have to play my cards right, and only appear from whatever hiding place I could find, so long as it took to get on the bus, and then duck under the windowsill to avoid detection. The bus, a rickety old contraption driven always by the distasteful Joe Sargent, was usually scheduled around this time and would take him straight home to Arkham. It was my last best hope for a motorized escape. I ran through the maze of decaying streets, my lungs burning, the fishy stench growing stronger with every block. I dared not look back, but I felt the pursuit, an unseen pressure, a growing dread, and even though I was running back into the belly of the beast, I had no clue what else I could do. When I reached the bus stop, a small, covered shelter near the Gilman House entrance, I saw it. The old gray bus was there, all right. Its tires were slashed, its windows shattered, and its engine lay on the ground beside it, torn out as if by some immense, unseen hand. Despair washed over me, cold and suffocating. I was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped within this diseased, forgotten town. I slumped against a crumbling wall, gasping for air, my mind racing. What now? The sea was out. I couldn't just swim away. I'd be torn to pieces by those fishy men. The land was blocked. My intelligence, usually my greatest strength, felt like a cruel joke. What good was analysis when the situation defied all logic? I looked around, truly looked, at the town that was my prison. The buildings seemed to lean in, oppressive and watchful. I saw more of them now, not just glimpses, huddled in groups in alleyways, their faces more distorted, their skin glistening. Their hands, where I could see them, looked swollen, webbed. Their voices were low, guttural, a series of clicks and gurgles that were utterly inhuman. They were discussing me. I could feel it. They were closing in. My fear, which had been a dull throb, now erupted into a full-blown panic attack. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I needed to hide, to disappear. I stumbled down a narrow, darkened alleyway, the walls slimy with moss and decay. It led to a particularly dilapidated section of town, a collection of forgotten tenements and warehouses. I thought of the old seafood canning factory, long abandoned. It was a labyrinth of rusty machinery and dark corners. Perhaps I could hide there until nightfall, then try to sneak out. As I hurried through the alley, a shadow detached itself from the gloom ahead. It was one of them, closer than I'd ever been to one in the light of day, if you could call Innsmouth's perpetual twilight light. Its eyes, large and unblinking, were fixed on me. Its mouth was a wide, toothless slit, but I could hear a faint, wet hiss emanating from it. And then I saw it clearly. On its neck, just beneath its chin, were 3 small, slit-like openings, gills, fanning faintly, rhythmically. My rationality shattered. My legs moved on their own, carrying me past the creature in a surge of pure terror. Its hand, bulbous and webbed, shot out, grazing my arm. The touch was cold, slimy, sending a shock of revulsion through me. I didn't stop. I ran, not looking back, the sound of its wet, dragging footsteps pursuing me. I burst into the desolate interior of the old canning factory. The air was thick with the reek of ancient fish guts and rust. Piles of decaying nets, broken crates, and rusting machinery created a chaotic maze. I scrambled over a stack of splintered wooden boxes, my breath ragged, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "Art! You shouldn't be seeing this, boy!" a guttural voice rasped from behind me. I spun around, my blood freezing. It was Mr. Wells. He stood there, silhouetted against the dim light filtering through a broken window. But he was no longer human. His torso was impossibly distended, his skin a mottled gray and green, his head flattened, his eyes like enormous, unblinking fish eyes. His hands were webbed claws, dripping with something dark and viscous. The gurgling sound I'd heard earlier, it was coming from him. "You're one of us, Art," he hissed, his voice like rocks grinding together. "You've been here too long. The change will come. Don't fight it." He lunged. My mind, though overridden by terror, still registered movement, angles, escape routes. I ducked under a rusty conveyor belt, scrambling on my hands and knees, the metallic tang of old blood filling my nostrils. Mr. Wells crashed into the machinery, a terrible, wet thud. I heard him thrashing, cursing in that inhuman tongue. I didn't stop. I kept crawling, deeper into the factory, pressing myself against cold metal, the slick dampness of the concrete floor seeping into my clothes. I had to find a way out, not just from the factory, but from Innsmouth itself. My eyes darted around, searching for an alternative. A faint glimmer of light caught my attention, high up on the far wall. A ventilation chute, perhaps? Or a maintenance tunnel? It was small, dangerously high, but it was a chance. I found a stack of old metal drums and began to clamber up, my muscles screaming in protest. The drums were slick, unstable, threatening to topple. From below, I heard Mr. Wells again, closer this time, his gurgling growls echoing through the cavernous space. I reached the opening, a narrow, rusted grate, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. It opened into a dark, dusty tunnel. I kicked at the grate, the rusted metal groaning, until it finally tore free with a screech of tortured protest. I scrambled inside, my breath rasping in my throat, my body scraping against the sharp edges of the tunnel. It was a crawl space, dark and suffocating, leading upwards. I pushed forward, blindly, driven by the sheer will to survive. The air was stale, thick with the smell of decay, and something else, something sweet and sickly, like rotten flowers. I could hear the sounds of Mr. Wells below me, his grotesque form trying to climb after me, his heavy, wet breathing reverberating through the structure. The tunnel twisted, inclined sharply, and then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint glimmer of natural light ahead. It was at the very top of the factory, a small access hatch, probably for roof repairs. With a final surge of desperate energy, I shoved the hatch open. Cool, fresh air, or at least Innsmouth's version of it, washed over me. I crawled out onto the flat, tarred roof. The mist was still thick, but through a momentary thinning, I could glimpse the town laid out below me. It was a terrifying panorama. The streets were swarming with them now. Hundreds of them. Their strange, undulating forms, their slick, gray-green skin catching the dim light. They were everywhere, patrolling, searching. Like a hive suddenly disturbed, my stomach churned. This was it. There was no escape via the ground. But the roof led to other roofs, connected buildings, stretching down towards the coastline. My eyes fixed on a distant, ramshackle fishing boat, docked at a private, run-down pier, partially obscured by a larger warehouse. It was small, old, probably barely seaworthy, but it was there. I had one chance. I would have to traverse the rooftops, scale buildings, avoid the masses below, and somehow reach that boat. Maybe with all the fishermen on land, an otherwise unlikely sea getaway was possible. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. I was no athlete, just a grocery clerk. But the primal urge to survive was a powerful motivator. I started to move, carefully, silently, across the tarred surface, heading towards the next building. The rooftop journey was a nightmare of rusty skylights, crumbling parapets, and dizzying drops. I climbed down fire escapes that groaned under my weight, scaled drainage pipes, and leaped across terrifying gaps between buildings. My hands were raw, my muscles screamed, and every shadow seemed to conceal a waiting horror. At one point I nearly slipped, my foot landing on a loose slate tile. It clattered loudly, shattering the oppressive silence. Below, a dozen heads snapped up, their bulging eyes locking onto me. A chorus of wet, croaking sounds rose from the street. I froze, pressed against the crumbling brickwork, my breath held. They started to move, shambling towards the buildings, some attempting to scale the lower walls, their clawed hands scrabbling for purchase. Panic surged anew, but my intelligent mind, even in its terror, registered the distance, the time. They were slow climbers. I still had a chance. I launched myself across the remaining rooftops, driven by pure adrenaline, until I reached the warehouse overlooking the private pier. I found a rusty ladder leading down to a forgotten loading bay. I descended, my hands slick with sweat and grime, and found myself in a dark, cavernous space filled with the smell of old fish and gasoline. I could hear them now, on the outside, their gurgling voices, their heavy, wet splashes as they moved closer to the waterfront. They knew I was here. They were closing the net. I reached the loading bay door. It was locked from the inside. I fumbled for the rusty bolts, wrenching them back, my fingers aching. The door creaked open, revealing the small, dilapidated fishing boat, bobbing gently on the dark, oily water. It was barely more than a dinghy with a small, sputtering motor, but it was salvation. I scrambled aboard, untying the mooring ropes with frantic haste. The engine! I had to get the engine started. I fumbled with the cold, greasy mechanism, pulling the starter cord again and again, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Each pull was an eternity. The sounds from the shore grew louder, more insistent. Splashing, heavy footfalls, the disturbing wet clicking. Then, a gurgling voice right behind me. "No escape!" I spun around. Standing on the pier, just a few feet away, was a creature of pure nightmare, taller than a man, its skin a mottled, slimy green-gray, its head a monstrous, flattened thing with huge, unblinking eyes that truly seemed to glow in the mist. Its mouth was a wide, toothless maw that twitched. Its hands were enormous, webbed claws, and from its neck, prominent, pulsating gills fanned open and closed. It was what Mr. Wells was becoming, what all of them would become, a horrific, alien transformation, complete and utterly terrifying. It lunged. At that exact moment, the engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a triumphant, rattling sound. Never had I been so thankful for my uncle's fishing trips growing up as in that moment. His teachings had just saved my life. I jammed the throttle forward, throwing the boat into reverse. The creature's clawed hand missed my face by inches, its fingers scraping against the wooden railing of the boat. Its eyes, full of ancient malice, fixed on me. The boat lurched backward, away from the pier. The creature stood there, on the edge, its unblinking stare following me. Then, with a sudden, powerful surge, it splashed into the water, a massive disturbance in the oily blackness. My eyes widened in horror. It was coming after me. And it wasn't alone. Beneath the surface, I saw shapes, dark, torpedo-like forms, moving with incredible speed, cutting through the water towards my small, struggling boat. Others were emerging from the shore, sliding back into the water, their forms disturbingly swift and graceful in their native element. I gripped the tiller, pushing the engine to its absolute limit, the little boat bucking and plunging through the chop. The mist was my only ally now, a shifting, benevolent veil that might conceal me. I looked back. The pier was receding, Innsmouth shrinking into a dark, foreboding silhouetted against the gray sky. And in the water, I could see them. Dozens of them. Their heads bobbing on the surface, their eyes glowing, their unnatural speed carrying them closer. I could hear their gurgling calls, a chilling chorus that echoed over the water. My heart was a frozen lump in my chest, but I refused to give in. I steered the boat out into the vast, open ocean, away from the cursed coastline, away from the nightmare of Innsmouth. I didn't know where I was going, or what I would do when I got there. All I knew was that I had to keep going, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that awful place, between myself and the knowledge of what festered there. The creatures pursued me for what felt like hours, their strange forms a constant, horrifying presence in my wake, their gurgling cries a haunting symphony. But gradually, as the sun continued its ascent, painting the sky with sickly purples and grays, their numbers dwindled. The mist began to lift, revealing the endless expanse of the ocean. Finally, I was alone, truly alone, on the vast, indifferent sea. I eventually drifted into the shipping lanes, a ghost of myself, my mind shattered but my body alive. A passing cargo ship spotted my derelict boat and pulled me aboard. They found me babbling incoherently about gills and fishmen, and a town that was a lie. They thought I was mad, or drunk. I let them believe it. I never returned to Innsmouth. I never told anyone the full truth of what I saw, what I experienced, that horrifying day. The memories are branded into my soul, the stench of brine and decay perpetually clinging to my senses. I know now that the world is far stranger, far more terrifying than any man should ever know. And sometimes, the most intelligent thing you can do, when faced with an unspeakable horror, is to simply run. And keep running. Forever. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And the fear, like the ocean itself, is endless.